getting connected back with Seesaw. We have shared things. If you haven't seen the previous 3 weeks, this might not make a whole lot of sense, but you might want to go back and watch at least the last 2, because tonight we're going to be talking about kind of the final step in creating something in Seesaw, which is looking at student responses, getting some data, and using it to drive or plan some instruction for yourself moving forward. So this is something that Sarah, I don't know if you remember using Seesaw. We did not. I think when Sarah and I taught, we didn't have the paid accounts yet.
No.
But one thing that was always hard was like to give kids timely feedback, or to be able to go through, if you have assigned more than one thing, to really be able to go through and even see who's done what and who's done it correctly.
Correct.
So this today is going to give you hopefully like, oh my gosh, this is going to make my life a little bit easier now that you know these new things. So I'm going to bring in our screen here today. And if you remember last week, Sarah, do you want to give a little recap of the formative assessments and what that can do?
So yeah, last week we shared just how you can, 2 weeks ago we shared how you can find some already created assessments. Last week we talked about how you can create your own. So the Seesaw library has some, the community has some that are available. So lots of options for formative assessments that have already been created for you. And if you keep a lookout for our monthly update, you will actually see some examples shared out in that as well for you for our day of digital learning. But last week we talked about both finding, and then we also talked about creating assessments. So when you're creating an assessment, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can create a multiple choice. You can create drag and drop. You can do poll questions or true and false questions. You can also use the frames, which we really liked as well, where you can frame out students to record or do a text box. And what Shannon, I think Shannon mentioned that was like her favorite, because it kept the text, instead of using that big T and making the text really large, it gave them a nice little text box to respond. And you'll actually see an example of that here as we share out some information today. But lots of really great options for the formative assessment when you are both finding and creating your own. So pretty simple to use, and just get a lot of really good results from it. So, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So Sarah and I did a little test. We created a formative assessment, or I should say Sarah created a formative assessment that was really just what I would consider would probably be a quick check style, because you'll see when I show you the questions here that it's not necessarily a ton of differentiated questions. It's really like a repeated practice of a skill. So we know that if we have like 4 to 7 questions on a skill, that's kind of a good target number when you're creating an assessment. So on this assessment here, this is the date she assigned it. So Monday, the 29th, you can see here are any assessments or any activities that you've assigned live under that date. So that's one place to check them. But if you also are like, what's in progress, I can come over here to my progress tab, and then all of your different activities, if you have them scored, will kind of line up. Since this is a PL group, we don't have a ton, but if you're a teacher, you probably have a lot more in that progress tab.
And what's really nice about that, Shannon, and I know everybody's kind of different in how they keep track of how their students are turning in work. But what's nice is that if I have that progress tab open, I can see very easily, I can see who's done it, who's turned it in, and who hasn't. So I know that if I'm doing, an unfun Friday where my students are going back and, making sure that their work is complete for the week, I can easily tell who has done what without having to go to like each student tab or have, a bunch of different things open. That progress button, that's huge, because it will show all of the things that my students have been working on.
Yeah, and right down here, you can see that what Sarah's kind of talking about too. It shows that 31 kids completed this, 0 waiting for review, 0 drafts, and 0 not started. So if it's like 7 not started, then you can be like, Sarah, Eric, Sarah, everybody, you come back to my table because we're going to work on this together or get started. So it's just an easy way to track things of who's completed what, because you'll have that tab there. So you can see the other information here is that it gives me some tags here, like this was assigned to all students and groups. So if I did have differentiated groups doing differentiated assignments, I could do that here. It's an assessment and it's math. So it gives me those tags. So if I'm sorting things later, I've got all of those things kind of present for me. And then what I like about this is, like we said last week, this is a great way for your team. So like all of the third grade teachers are going to do this assignment on Friday. And all you have to do is bring this data, and you don't really have to spend any time necessarily. We'll show you some ways you can give personalized feedback. But if I'm really looking for that progress monitoring style formative assessment, I can come in here and then I can hit review, and then we're going to show you some different ways to see the data. Mm-hmm. So if you scroll down here, this is going to give me the first picture I have kind of what results the kids did. So just for reference of this assignment, it was just a drag and drop of greater than or comparing numbers. So the questions kind of have a similar style of repeating. There is one option where kids had multiple choice with Sarah put in a frame for them to explain their work. And then again, one additional place where they could tell 3 things with the text box. So the data that you're seeing on the screen is really giving us the data for the multiple choice things that the assessment could grade. It didn't listen to the recordings. It didn't check the text box, but it is the things that I gave point values to, or Sarah gave point values to. That's what I'm seeing the data around right now. So you can see we had 20 students with 90 to 100%, 5 with 75 to 89%, and then 1 with 60 to 74, and then 4 that probably need some immediate reteaching and things. So I get a quick picture of what our class did. And if you're a teacher that tracks class data, this is great because if you have a goal of like 80% of our class is going to get an 80% or higher or 75% or higher, now you can go back and quickly report to students how you did and if you need to reassign things there. So we're feeling pretty good right now about our teaching because look at all these kids who showed mastery. We've just got some reteaching to do here.
And I love that because it's very easy to see like, okay, I have this group of kids right here that are in my red or my yellow that I am going to need to do some reteaching with. And so I know that right away. I don't have to wait until I have an opportunity to go back and like go through all the work and then go through a checklist and check, and then group my students. They're already grouped. They're right there. I can tell who needs what. And then as we kind of go through some of the data too, it gets more individualized as to how students answered which questions. But yeah, it's super simple then to just group your kids and know who needs what additional support.
And the other good thing I would say is like, if you click on most parts of the screen, it does other things for you. So the first time you come in here or do one of these with your kids, just start clicking around and see what data points it will show you. Because like if I click on this dark green bar, it drops down and you can see here's all the names of the teachers who got a 90 to 100%. And then obviously these would be students in your classroom's names, so it would be easier to figure out. But I can see like teacher 1, okay, I want to know exactly what teacher 1 did wrong to get this score. So now I can I clicked into the class, I clicked into yellow. Now I have teacher 1's question, and I'm like, okay, which number is greater? So maybe greater than or less. But then you got several. Number is less is incorrect. So I'm noticing 2 that are wrong about which is greater. Another one that is which is greater. So I'm already kind of saying like, okay, teacher 1's going to need some reteaching on the vocabulary of greater and understanding that greater is more. So I already know like that's a small group focus for this student. And then what symbol can be used to compare the numbers? They got that incorrect. So if I click specifically on this one, you can see she picked the wrong symbol there. And then I could also hit play and hear their response about why they chose that answer. So it gives you like, I wouldn't necessarily need to go in and listen to all of my students' responses, especially if I had a high percentage getting it accurately. I guess I just would say like, in my mind, I don't need to hear every single kid's response. I might do some spot checking, but I am going to go in and listen to my kids who probably are yellow or red so I can get a further understanding of why they maybe selected that answer.
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm going to come back out here and you can again just see all of these things.
Yep, there's my small group that I need to pull back for some more direct instruction.
And then the other, so that's kind of looking at it like a holistically of what kids are just like here's my kids who need definite reteaching. But then if you want to look at it in kind of a different way and like maybe there was something that I didn't teach effectively because even some of my kids up here with 90 to 100% didn't necessarily score them all correct. So is there something that the whole class could still benefit from? me doing a lesson on reteaching. So I can come down here and I can look specifically at the questions. So I can see if is anything standing out to me. So this is the most commonly missed question. Which number is less? And the correct answer is 0, but 11 people marked it 5. So I want to kind of think about that, like what about that question made them 11 people get that wrong? Because in my mind, is it because it was 0 and they just thought that 0 wasn't, able to be compared? Or is it the word? So that would be something I would probably put up on my screen with the class and have a discussion around. Like because I'm sure some kids are going to raise their hand then and tell me why they chose 5. But to me, this is a question almost, a third of the class got it incorrect. So I probably would spend time as a whole group reinforcing the 0 can be less than a number. So that would just be something, and another way to look at those data sets. And again, this one here, which is smaller, 14 or 16. Now, the way these were laid out on the page were like 2 multiple choice next to each other. So it could also just be a test taking skill of like, you read the question for the first one and assumed that was the question for the second one without reading. So those things you're going to be able to come through and see as well.
And Shannon, what's nice too is that because we learned about the present to class button, this then is something you can take and present to your class in a whole group setting when you are ready to do something like that, to do some reteaching. Okay, let's talk about a couple of these, because I noticed that, a large percentage of our class really struggled with these particular questions. So now we can bring it up and I can easily talk with my students about it and share the screen with them and have a conversation about which number is less.
Yeah.
And then also going through maybe some of those test taking skills for that question number 10, that we can walk through how we would look at a question like this and, how do we tackle it? Do we just assume? Do we guess? Do we need to make, just a thoughtful, be thoughtful about our questioning and our answering? So the present to class then really comes in handy when you're going back over some of these questions with your students as well.
And then a way to, like, just speaking of test taking skills, one of the hardest things I think for students, especially when it's a digital format, is when there are going to be questions on iLearn that maybe ask them to explain their thinking. And so a great way to use Seesaw to kind of get kids there is like, okay, I'm going to put a frame here for you to explain your thinking out loud. And then I'm going to allow my kids, I do want them to type it because the expectation is they will type it eventually on iLearn. But if I ask them to speak it first, if I'm a student, I can go back and re-listen to what I said several times so that when I type it, it accurately reflects what I said orally. And that's just one of those UDL type principles of things that are going to make this a more equitable experience for all. Some kids need to orally process things. And even though that stage of the question might be removed later, it's going to give them the ability to, like, how do I think through this and listen to myself internally talk several times before I have to put that out there. So just kind of keeping in mind that these are great ways to build student capacity for things that they're going to have to do in the future. And if this is a normal part of your routine in your classroom, it's not going to be an overwhelming experience when they're asked to do it later in what we normally consider an isolated experience. This might be a way that they could, oh yeah, I remember when I did that. That's just what we do in math every day.
And that's why, too, I added in that question, that last question in the assessment, which was to tell 3 things that you know about comparing numbers. Because a lot of times students will be asked to, even in a multiple choice, choose 3 questions or choose 2 options. And so we want to give them those experiences with having to do more than one of something. And so tell me 3 things that you know, because a lot of times when they are also, reading text, 3 important facts. And so we're kind of making that connection too with even, taking almost a reading assessment, not that reading is math, but they're practicing some of those same skills that they're going to see, and they can kind of see how sometimes those things are connected. And our test taking isn't always just done in isolation for reading or for math, but sometimes, those things can kind of overlap. So that's also why I included that text box question, because any experiences that we can give our students when they're asked to type something or name 3 or give 2 examples, is a good experience for them just to get them ready.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing I'll kind of point out here is I did want to show you this. So after I'm looking at my students in the red, if I'm looking at each student kind of individually, I did want to point out that when I got into Teacher 13, they only had 9%. And so I want to know like what happened. And so I can see here as I scrolling through that this student did not even complete the assignment really. So just keep in mind, like now I can come back and you can reassign things to students, or they can go in and add another response. So I would definitely go to student 13 and say, hey, you didn't really finish this, so I'm going to send it back to you so that you can do, because you do want to get a true picture of what that student can do. So just keeping in mind those data. So to me, this is, and I think we've said it before, but I'll just say it again. I just feel like this is a great way to create some of those common assessments that are hard to do as a grade level, but you want to do. So a quick formative check as many times as you can on simple skills, like every day, you could almost have a math form quick check. So we are going to give a little challenge here. I know Sarah has her form that she's going to put in the end, but if you make one and put a quick check or something in there with your kids to do with this, and just email us or put in the comments that you did it, we'll send a little swag item your way. I can't tell you what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be really good. So it's going to be a good one. But that's kind of, I think, Sarah, is there anything we missed on the data set?
No, I don't think so. We were, I think, also going to go in and show how to leave some other additional comments for students, which is kind of the old school way that Shannon and I used to give our students feedback for the work that they've done. Because there are some other options.
Yeah. So if you think, like Sarah said, you come down to one of those questions that had more of an open-ended response, there are some tools at the bottom that you can use. So like is pretty standard. You can give it a little heart. Comment is you can come in and you can do a comment that you have. And some, I have teachers that have like a spreadsheet of things that they've just like written out comments that they can copy and paste into them. So if you're thinking ahead, just Google a list of compliments, put it out there that you can copy and paste, or get specific if your heart desires. But then you can also leave a voice comment, which is super nice, that if you don't have time to type, or you're, in your car waiting for your other kids to be picked up from a sport practice or something, you could just come in and leave voice notes, because it does have an app that you can use too. Not that you want to be doing that all the time, but it is an option to give you that kind of quick response for students.
And kids love to hear your voice and love to hear back from you. Like, great job answering this question. I love how thorough you were. They'll eat it up.
Mm-hmm. And then just a couple other little things. You can, add it to a folder. You can save it. I don't even know what that little skill. So you could see at the top when I'm doing it, if I'm really saying like, I'm going to do several exit slips on comparing numbers, I can create this and I'm going to give it a rating of like 4, and then I'm going to move it on. So the next time I tag something with that same skill, I can sort of start to compile it so that I can have a series of assignments that have that same tagged skill. Mm-hmm. Folders, again, you can just save this activity into like their math folder. And then finally, remember when Sarah had that highlight button? Like if there's a student who's done something that's super awesome that like, I'm going to want to highlight this week as parent-teacher conference week, mm-hmm. I'm going to click on the little award, and that goes into that student's highlight portfolio, that when they come to look at it, they can see that a teacher has identified this as like a great piece of work that you want to review with parents. Yep. Okay. So then you can kind of just quick scroll through the kids' post down there at the bottom. You can always see all of the things can edit. And last, these are great bulletin boards too. Like if your kids create something, if you get post QR code, it screenshots their activity page in the middle, and then someone walking by in the hall could come out and scan that, and then they could hear the kids' voices. Mm-hmm. So if you want to impress your principal with like some high tech, leveraging digital, make that your next bulletin board. And save yourself some time there. Okay. All right, Sarah, we got a little windy again this week. We're almost at 20 minutes, but we'll wrap it up here quick. This has been a great 4-part series. We hope that you've enjoyed it. Share with us some ways you've tried it out if you can, because I think the more people like hearing from we like hearing from each other in the comments to see what cool things you're doing. So let us know. Next week, our secondary team is going to be taking over for February, and they've got some great things planned. So I would say like Seesaw's big sister is Cammie, and that's what they're going to be starting with because she does have like a little bit more of appeal, doing some similar features that Seesaw does, but really for a little bit older students. So I would say 5th through 12th grade. Really probably lean more on Cammie.
Absolutely. And if there's another topic that you want to know more about, please let us know and we can start creating a series on that as well. We picked Seesaw because we knew that there were a lot of different features that were new and updated, and we weren't sure how many people knew about the formative assessments. So that was kind of our thought process behind this series. So if you have another idea, let us know. We'll be happy to highlight that next. Drop it in the comments, send us an email. Let us know how we can continue to support you.
All right. Well, have a great night. I know it's a long one with parent-teacher conferences, but we will make it through, and you'll have a nice day on Friday.
That's right.
Okay. All right.